and welcome to a very special episode of Everyplace Is The Same. As we move from 2018 into 2019, I want to thank all of our listeners all over the world and let you know we've got so much great stuff in store for the coming year. Today, I am so excited to have this very special guest. As we say goodbye to 2018 and hello to 2019, our director and producer, our very own Marco Timpano.
Hi, Daniela.
Hey, Marco. Welcome to this side of E-Pits.
Yes.
Now, Marco, New Year's Eve is iconic in many places in the world.
That's right, yeah.
One of them being Times Square in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
Okay, so Times Square in New York City, if you haven't been, is sort of the center of it all. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of things going on. It is kind of rectangular or square-shaped. You've got Broadway.
Actually, Marco, it's the shape of a bow tie.
Oh, I didn't. Okay, so it's kind of like it cinches in the middle, I guess.
Yes,
right?
It does.
Okay, so
very festive, isn't it?
Yeah, because you would wear a bow tie for New Year's. That's right. The ball drops there, and it's just a place. If it's the center of New York, and everyone says Times Square, when you think of New York, it's one of the iconic things you think of New York. Now,
Marco, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've also spent some time in the Red Square in Moscow. Is that correct?
Yes, I have. I went to Moscow years ago, and part of seeing Moscow is going to the center of Moscow, which one could argue is Red Square. And I think that's more square-shaped.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
A very popular destination.
Indeed. Like, that's the place. That's one of the places, if you're going to go, there's so much going on in Red Square that is quintessentially Moscow.
Would you say that Times Square in New York and the Red Square in Moscow are the same?
Well, just in that they're squares in major cities. But otherwise, I would say they're very different. Different. No, I would say they're different.
Well, Marco, today on Everyplace Is The Same, we are going to prove that Times Square in New York City, USA, and the Red Square in Moscow, Russia, are in fact the same.
Good luck with that.
Tonight is a very special night in Times Square.
That's right. It's the ball drops in the Big Apple, which is another word for New York. And basically this big, it looks like a disco ball. And I saw it in real life, Daniela. I actually saw the ball. And it just comes at the stroke of midnight. It comes down and everybody wishes everybody a Happy New Year. And people there are wearing those glasses that say the new year that's coming. And they kiss and they celebrate and they drink and they have a grand old time.
Did you know that the ball drop was invented by the Artcraft Strauss company? And it was actually invented by Jakob Starr, who was a Russian immigrant.
I had no idea his balls dropped like that.
Yes, they did. And they came from Russia.
Oh, wow.
New Year's Eve in the Red Square is also quite iconic. It is actually, New Year's Eve is the most popular holiday in all of Russia.
That I did not know.
They also have a large party in the square. Midnight is signified by the clock tower in the Kremlin, counting down to midnight.
Wow. I think a lot of cities have their festations, or whatever you call it, the celebration for New Year's, in their major squares. But now that clearly makes sense. I didn't know Russians that was a big holiday for them.
It's the biggest one of the year, Marco.
Wow.
What else can you tell me about Times Square?
Okay, so Times Square is where you're going to find the theater district, otherwise known as Broadway. There was a time when I lived in New York where Times Square was really seedy and you saw a lot of sex workers and porno shops and it had this sort of mysterious element. And today, many people say that it's very Disney-fied. You have Disney and you have all these stores with bright lights and it's much safer and much more sanitized, if you will.
Did you feel safe in the Red Square?
Oh, I certainly felt safe in the Red Square. When I was in Moscow, I had no issues whatsoever.
No, it's actually a very safe place. Mm-hmm. It's actually quite militarized, or was at one point.
Yeah, it was when I was there. You saw the presence of the military there.
Military marches.
Yes.
Military bands.
Yep.
They've also had many famous concerts in the Red Square.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Paul McCartney.
That's right, because he released that Russian album years ago, and it was a big thing.
Michael Jackson.
Right, yeah, I remember that.
Red Hot Chili Peppers.
I think they were one of the first to really do a big concert there from the West.
Metallica.
There you go.
Who knew?
Not me.
So whether you want to see a very exciting concert or show, you can see that in the Red Square or in Times Square.
Right, because all of Broadway's there. And I think, Daniela, too, what they'll do is in the middle of Times Square, they'll often have the actors who are in musicals come out and perform live for the public for special events like Good Morning America and whatnot. So they'll set up a stage right in Times Square. So, yeah, those two things are the same.
Yes, they are. As a matter of fact, Alicia Keys had a very famous concert in Times Square called Here is Times Square, where they closed the entire square and had an outdoor concert. So there you go. Famous concerts. Tell me about St. Basil's Cathedral.
So it's right on one of the ends of the square, and it's this beautiful iconographic sort of cathedral church that has rotund turrets or towers that are different colored, and it's really something that is colorful and a spotlight in that square.
Now tell me about the church in Times Square.
There's a beautiful church in Times Square. One could say it's a cathedral. And
Church of St. Mary the Virgin.
Yes, and
often known as Smoky Mary.
I don't know why.
The strong smell of the incense.
Okay, yes. So
wafting from inside of the church gave it the nickname Smoky Mary.
Wow. Now I wish I would have went in and prayed to Smoky Mary.
Well, you still can. Incense, also widely used in the St. Basil's Cathedral.
That's right. Yes, it is. We went inside and it was very strong scent of incense.
Very pungent.
Yes, I would say.
So incense used quite liberally in both places.
Yeah, and you wouldn't expect it, to be honest with you, Daniela. That's not the first thing you think about when you think of either square as incense. But, yeah, now that you mention it.
What are some other New Year's Eve traditions that happens in Times Square?
Well, it used to be Dick Clark used to be the guy who would talk about, like, he was always associated with Times Square, and now he's dead. So they have Anderson Cooper who does it, and he represents the celebration on Times Square. I think you see it on CNN.
There are also many concerts and TV shows featuring musical artists that happen in the Red Square.
Yeah, and they do that in Times Square for New Year's, too. Like, I forgot, they throw it to different artists who perform right in the square. Yeah.
That's right. So, music is a very popular thing to help celebrate the coming of the new year in both squares.
Yeah, you can't argue that.
There's a drink that is quite popular on New Year's Eve. What do you think that is?
I'm going to say champagne.
You are absolutely right, Marco. Champagne it is. As a matter of fact, it is a Russian tradition that you make a wish on a piece of paper, you burn that piece of paper, and you drink the remnants in a glass of champagne when the bells gong.
Wow. You know, it's so funny you mentioned it. I haven't thought of this for years, but everyone thinks of vodka when they think of Russia and Moscow. And we drank great amounts of champagne there, too. It's very popular. And I think they get it from Georgia, one of the former Russian states. But it was fantastic, and that totally makes sense to me.
Champagne? Popular in New York?
Well, yeah. I mean, like, you know, you always hear of the toast of the town, especially with Broadway and whatnot. And you, of course, always toast with champagne. So
yes, you always do. We should be toasting with some right now.
That's right.
Tell me about fireworks.
They scare me.
Do they?
They do. They're loud, and they have like a really strong pop sound, and so I often get frightened.
Popular on New Year's Eve?
Indeed, yes. All over the place.
Were you frightened when you were in Times Square and fireworks were going off?
You know, a lot of people can be frightened in Times Square with regards to the amount of people that are there, the chaos, the noise.
But were you frightened, Mr. Timpano? Not a lot of people. You.
I hate to admit it, but yeah, I was frightened of the fireworks in Times Square.
What about in the Red Square?
if you're not from there, you could feel a little bit out of place. It's really large and vast, and so you could get lost. I think we actually got lost in Red Square, so there was a moment of fear. Yeah.
Now, in both places, if you're planning to attend the New Year's Eve celebration, you have to get there early, you have to dress warm, and you have to hold your spot.
That makes sense. Yes, I would confirm that.
And once you're in, it's very difficult to leave.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things that people complain about is that there's nowhere to use a restroom, or you really have to go into one of the restaurants. And in Times Square, there's a lot of restaurants to use a restroom, and there's lines, and it's really a difficult experience. So if you go, wear a diaper.
Restaurants in the Red Square?
None that I remember.
Many, many restaurants surround the Red Square where you can get different kinds of foods from around the world.
Okay, there you go.
Now, you talked about shopping when you talked about Times Square.
Right. Lots of shopping. You can get just about anything. If you want something plastic and cheap or cheaply made, you'll find it in Times Square.
Will you find luxury items in Times Square?
Yes, but you'll pay an even more premium price for that.
Well, in the Red Square, gum.
That's right, gum. Yeah.
Sorry, gum.
Mm-hmm.
The oldest department store in Russia. Full of luxury items?
Yes, 100%. You'll find everything there from Prada to Louis Vuitton to Moschino. You name it, it's there. Along with a lot of luxurious Russian items that Westerners might not be familiar with. But I remember going there and saying, oh, look at these beautiful things. And they were Russian luxury items. It's a great, great department store.
So if you want to shop in a very popular area for overpriced luxury items, you can do that in Times Square or in Red Square.
Yeah, you can spend a lot of money in both places, 100%.
Yes, you can. Talk to me about Lenin's tomb.
Okay, so Daniela, it's where the former Soviet leader, Lenin, is laid to rest. And you go in a long lineup. And it's very somber, and you sort of snake your way through. And once you're inside, you kind of snake your way around and you see him lying there, I guess lying in state, but lying there dead as a doornail with a light on him that really makes him glow. And it's a very sort of moment of reverence, or it's a place of reverence for sure. And you can see the former leader in his glory in his tomb right in Red Square.
Is there a place of reverence, would you say, in Times Square?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, Lenin is dead, Dick Clark is dead, and they were both important. Times Square or Red Square were people that represented those areas. Moments of reverence, I guess if you love musical theater, it's the place of reverence is Times Square.
It absolutely is.
Mm-hmm.
Walking.
Yep.
You cannot drive.
On either square.
In either square.
Right.
Why is that?
Because there's too many people, Daniela. There's a lot of people. It's a hub of activity, and so they've banned cars in both places.
Two very popular pedestrian walking areas.
Yes, and interesting you should say that Red Square has cobblestones all around, and I think they're kind of reddish in color. I have a feeling that's how it got its name. And I know that there's a section in Times Square where that naked cowboy sings and plays the guitar, that's cobbled. I think it's right in the middle. So they both have cobblestones in the squares.
So you can find cobble places in both places.
Mm-hmm. But you cannot find a cobbler. So if you walk and you break your heel, you're not going to find a cobbler in either place. So that's one thing that is different, but the same, that you can't find a cobbler in both places.
Same, different.
Yes.
Marco, we're walking through Times Square. It's New Year's Eve. I'm feeling parched. Where are you taking me?
I'm going to take you to two spots. Can I take you to two spots?
Yes, you can. It's New Year's Eve.
We can do whatever we want. I'm going to take you to this restaurant called Butter, where the executive chef is Alex Guanaschelli. You might remember her. She does that show where they have to compete, that cooking show. I can't remember the name of it. Anyways, she's one of the judges there, and she has a restaurant there that's fantastic. And I would make sure that we got some sort of New Year's cocktail. So probably a champagne cocktail, which is fine quality champagne, a sugar cube, and bitters. And we toast the night there. And then we would walk across Times Square to a little place called Junior's, which makes the best New York cheesecake. And we would finish our night with New York cheesecake, all the while blowing those things that signify New Year's Eve.
Horns.
Horns, thank you.
We're in Red Square.
Mm-hmm.
We're walking around. It's cold.
Yes.
Where are you taking me?
So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to take you to a spot where we can get some of the finest vodka. They have like these little tiny shops where you can sort of like cafes, right? So what I'm going to do is, because it's going to be cold, because we're in Red Square, you and I are going to get a coffee, and we're going to put a hit of vodka in that coffee, and we're going to slurp it down, and then we're gonna head towards Lenin's tomb, and we're going to walk through Lenin's tomb and honor and pay our respects there, and then we're going to head to the other side, and we're going to do some shopping in GUM.
I can hardly wait.
It's a dream.
If you're looking for a place to ring in the new year, where you want to see the fireworks and have your balls drop, if you just want to do some luxury shopping or celebrate famous dead people that represent the square, Dick Clark or Vladimir Lenin, raise a glass of champagne, and Marco, you have helped us prove that Times Square in New York City and the Red Square in Moscow, Russia, are the same.
I didn't mean to do it, but clearly I did.
Marco, you should have known better.
I should have. 2 great places to celebrate the New Year's and 2 places that are exactly the same.
Absolutely. I want to wish all of our Everyplace Is The Same listeners a Happy New Year. I hope the coming year lets you explore all the places that we have visited and some that we haven't. And make sure you start the year off right by giving us a 5-star review.